the climactic scene that resolves the character plot and is a beat, resolve the character's arc and is a beat for the plot. So it's not just that the character realized the true meaning of friendship, right, in that scene, but also in that scene, how does that progress the plot, right? So really trying to make sure you can tie your character's development to the plot. Now, if it's the main character, maybe you want this to not just be a beat in the plot, but also the resolution of the plot. That's possible, but it's not required. But at the minimum, it should be a beat for the plot. Otherwise, it's going to seem like the character's development was just random, has nothing to do with anything. The definition of those three things. So you first phase, you have your notes, which is your creativity, your ideas. And then second, you have your outline, which is a document, right? This is the craft of how you pull all your ideas together in a structure that tells a story. And then thirdly is the actual text itself, where it can be part discovery, where there's things that you thought made sense in the outline, but once you write into a scene, you realize it doesn't work, or you get new ideas when you're in the scene. And really, when you're outlining, you're going between these three phases, right? And so in theory, this is, a pretty perfect little process where you're going from your notes to your text, your outline, back to your text. But as anyone knows, try to write anything, reality is really hectic, right? That you're bouncing around, ideas coming, your structure, you're updating it really quickly, you make changes. But the important part to recognize here is that because outlining is a complex process, if there's any issues between you going between these three different areas, it's going to show up in your work, right? If there's any barriers or any friction from you going from your notes to your outline, from your outline to your text, back to your notes, back to your text, back to your outline, is going to affect your work. So this is really where the tooling in the process you use come into play. And actually the reason I had created Lynit was for this. This was something I recognized in my own process, and that I really needed something to help me with this. And Lynit itself is even more focused on the outlining part, producing that actual structural document, but keeping in mind that you need your notes and you need your text. So for this workshop, if you've been to a Lynit workshop before, you know that we use the story of the tortoise and the hare as a backdrop to discuss the different, tips and structural components of a story. So we're going to do the same thing this time. And in this case, we're going to be focusing on this character, the fox, who isn't talked about at all in the original Tortoise and the Hare story, but we want to center them as the main character in this story that is really about the fox, because the fox is the one who instigated the whole dispute between the tortoise and the hare. And so we're going to set them as a main character and use this as a great sort of context for talking about character structure. But in addition to this, as we go through different sections, I want you to think of a character that you're familiar with. Now, this can be a character that you've written before, that you're working on, or even a character from a book or movie or TV show that you're familiar with. And we're going to take advantage of having an opportunity to apply some of these techniques and structural components that we're going to cover and comply to these characters that you're familiar with. And then we can, give and get feedback from each other on, how well we're applying it and ways we can strengthen it. So definitely start thinking of that character for you. But you'll be able to see me doing everything with the tortoise and the hare and using it as an example to explain the context, but then you'll be able to, play around with it with your own character. So let's move on to the character structure. And so in this triangle of the outlining, this section we're focusing on just the actual outline part, the craft, the document that you produce in order to capture the structure of the story you want to tell. So first, the ingredients of a character arc. So first we have the needs. And here I use this term instead of goals, which I have, the other places or other material on character arcs who use goals, but I prefer needs because needs doesn't require that the character is aware of the need, right? A goal, the character would need to be aware of a goal. If it's to be their goal, they need to know that. But needs doesn't have that requirement. And so I do prefer that term. Second are the stakes. So this is what happens if the character's needs are not met. What are the consequences? Thirdly are the challenges. What is in the way of a character reaching their needs? Why is it difficult to achieve their needs? And so those are the challenges. And lastly, we're going to cover the development type. Now, I break them into 4. Now, a lot of places use 3, maybe only. But I'm going to cover 4, and we'll see the difference. That I consider positive, negative to be opposites, and then flat and none to be opposites in a way. So we'll get into that and cover that in detail. But so first, let's start with the needs. So the needs, there are 2 types. They're the unconscious needs, as I mentioned earlier. And these are specific outcomes that the character unknowingly needs that is independent of the plot question, right? And I mean independent in the sense that it's not an obvious direct link between the plot question and this unconscious need. It's something that the character doesn't know, right? So in an example of, a cop drama, very common trope is that there's a cop who does not want a partner, right? And they prefer to do things alone, and they don't want to have to trust anyone. And so they may have an unconscious need of, finding a partner or being comfortable with trusting someone or depending on someone or asking for help. That may be an unconscious need of theirs. And initially it's independent of the plot, right? It may at some point be beneficial for them to resolve this need in order to solve the plot. But in this pure essence, it's seemingly independent of the plot. And it does not have to be dependent on it does not have to tie in directly to the plot for every character. But and maybe I should rephrase this to say that it may be independent of the plot question. Not that it's always independent, but I think in the creation of it, it should feel, for the reader's experience, is more enjoyable, that it doesn't seem obviously related, that you discover. So I would say independent such that it's sort of positioned as independent, it's irrelevant, it's just a quirk or something of the character, and then it becomes, potentially something later or not related to the plot. And then second are the conscious needs. So this is the reason the character wants to resolve the plot. So this is where the character motivation will come out, right? They're trying to achieve something, but this is their conscious need. They know about this thing. And because they know about it, and then they may or may not take action towards it, but this is why they want to resolve the plot, right? So in the cop drama, it may be that there's a serial killer that the cop needs to catch, and so that's their conscious need, to catch the serial killer, because maybe the serial killer also killed their uncle, and so they have this personal vendetta against them, and if they don't stop this serial killer before they kill again, they're just going to feel horrible, and so they have this conscious need that they're going after, but it's not the unconscious need, which is that they need to trust someone else. So you can have both. And so even if the story, in a cop drama, the cop knows that they need to, get a partner and they need to work on it and learn to trust someone, that pulls it into conscious need, right? And that can be the plot, become part of the plot. And they can still have another unconscious need, right? So I would say, especially for main characters, or they always have an unconscious need. But even for minor ones too, it can be really small. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but that's really something that can help a reader to connect with the character by them having that unconscious need, in addition to the conscious need where, they have some goal, something they want to do, but having this additional unconscious need, that's something that the character doesn't recognize in themselves, but you, the reader, can see that in them. So I'm going to switch over to Lynit and do this first stage for the fox character that we're, adding to the tortoise and the hare. So, if you haven't, if you're not familiar with Lynit or haven't seen it in a while, I'll just give a little brief overview of what we see here. On the left, we have all your element lists. So these are all the different elements. They're grouped by type. You have your arcs, your characters, your events, and your TSMs, which is short for theme, settings, and motif. In the center here, we have visualization. That's just giving you a high-level view of what are the relationships between your elements, which, for example, this arc of the tortoise peaceful walk, it has some beats in chapter 1, so it's progressing in chapter 1. And you can see it actually down here in the chapter planner, that for your different, for the character, the hare, for the tortoise peaceful walks, they have beats that have been added to this chapter or the different chapters. And so you can get this is how you can sort of plan how your beats play out. And so like the hare has its beats here, the tortoise. And so we're going to enter the character of the fox. So here on the side, I already have some beats for him created already, but we can ignore that for now. And I want to focus on sort of just the needs where we're just capturing the structural parts. So, but to give you a little more background on the fox, in the description, you can see that the fox, he owes a lot of people a lot of money and has a gambling problem, and his wife is threatening to leave him. Just a little bit of summary about him. And then in this document, we have some ideas, some notes, some concepts about this fox. He stayed up late with the hare the night before the race, and then he bet on the tortoise. He's been friendly with the hare for 15 years. He grew up on the rough side of town with the predator animals. And he thinks there's a quick fix to his debt and to his marriage problems. So just a little bit of context around the fox. And so when we look at the fox's unconscious needs, right? It's, what below the surface is something that the fox needs, right? Well, of all the information that we at least have about him so far, is really this belief that his unconscious need actually I'll start with the conscious need because that's easier, then we'll go back to the unconscious. So his conscious needs is that he knows that he's in debt and that he needs to get out of debt, right? And that his marriage, he needs to fix his problems. So I'll just do that first and then we'll go back to unconscious. So the conscious need is that he needs money fast to get out of debt, and he needs to fix problems with his marriage. So those is his conscious needs. Now his unconscious needs are mentioned in the summary that he has a gambling problem, right? And so and what is this, for this character, we can make it up, but it's like, what does this gambling problem come from, right? Is that he believes that there's a quick fix to his problems, right? He believes that gambling is a symptom of that, right? That he's gambling because he thinks he can quickly get out of his problems. But his unconscious need is really to learn and accept that, it takes time in order to, you know, achieve something of value. So I would say really his need is to, accept that it takes time to achieve something of value. And that's his unconscious need. Now, if you notice how I did this here is that I did the conscious need first and then abstracted from that the unconscious needs that can be what's fueling some of his needs, his conscious needs, right? That these problems, that the reason he's in a lot of debt is because he believes he has this unconscious need that, that he needs to accept that it takes time in order to achieve something of value. And similarly, with his wife, I think maybe I removed something, but a little more of a detail is that his marriage with his wife is troubled because he has a history of lying to her, and lying about gambling to her. So, so these conscious needs, these things that he's aware of, right, that he needs to fix, these external problems he has, they're all being generated by this same internal problem, right? That even for his marriage, he thinks that maybe I can just lie and just get out of something, and it's really coming from the same place. So I want to give you a moment to take your character that we had that I mentioned to sort of focus on, that we can practice for the structure, and break out their unconscious needs from their conscious needs. So next, we're going to cover the stakes. So there's first component of the stakes is the consequences of failure. So what is lost if the character doesn't meet their needs, both unconscious and conscious? What would be lost? Or another way of thinking of it is, what's the cost of staying where they are, right? So if you have a character who is in a negative place, right? You can see that they're suffering without having their needs met. So a consequences of failing is that they may stay in that state, right? So, in this cop drama example, if we wanted to show for this cop the consequences of staying where they were, which is, they currently think, they're better to be alone, they don't trust anyone, they don't want a partner, we would need to see them sad, right, and maybe depressed with their lonely life, right, that to recognize that that's just not a good place for them to stay, right? So that we can recognize the consequence of them not realizing that they need to bring, community into their life, friends and family, a partner, someone they can trust, that they may stay in this life that they're not happy with. But you would need to see that. But then that could be the consequence. If their life seemed decently okay, then, staying where they are isn't really a consequence. It would have to be they want to lose something by not meeting their needs. And then in terms of the stakes themselves, you can have stakes that are plot related, right? If they don't, in Lord of the Rings, if Frodo does not get the ring into Mordor, Sauron may take over the world, right? It's a plot related need. But then this other need, which is called psychic death, which is often, can be more related to, it can be related to the unconscious need, but not always. But the psychic death is a mental death, right? So if this character does not reach their needs, what's the level of the stake is that it can be so bad for them that it's like a mental death, right? So, for example, in a romance, there's a character who's looking for love and they need love in their life, right? And if, they meet someone that they're attracted to and it doesn't work out and the character's like, oh, well, a million fish in the sea. The stakes aren't really high for that relationship, right? For this character to fulfill their needs of love. They don't meet anyone, they're a little sad, but then they go on with their life. But if, this is the one person that this character has ever loved in their whole life, and if this person does not love them back, this character will be destroyed. They don't think they can be in a relationship with anyone. They're going to feel so depressed. Then that's psychic death. And when your stakes are very high, it draws the reader in because they're scared for the character, right? They understand that if the character does not, in a romance, get with this person they're attracted to, or in terms of Lord of the Rings, they don't get the ring into the fire. They understand that there's a lot of stakes, right? And you can always have both, right? But you can have multiple layers. And the more you can have different types of stakes, right? Different stakes that pile up over time that, throughout a character's, their arc or even just the story, they can start with a small level, a stake that's clear, right? In a cop drama, from the beginning, the cop needs to catch the serial killer. So we may know the plot related stakes pretty early on, right? But then later, you can increase the stakes for the character by then revealing something that may be a psychic death, right? Where maybe, he has a personal connection to the serial killer because the serial killer killed their uncle. And so because of this personal connection, if he doesn't catch the serial killer, he's going to, experience psychic death. It's just adding another layer, right? And there can be many different forms of psychic death, right? It can be just different aspects of their life where they have different stakes, right? And if he doesn't catch this killer, he's going to get fired because he's failed to catch the last 10 killers. And now this is the last one that if he does not catch this killer, he's going to lose his job. So then it adds another stake, right? That can be plot related, but also psychic death in the sense they won't have a job, right? So they can be multiple stakes that overlap with each other. But the closer you can get to psychic death, the stronger the stakes will feel for the character. So let's move to the Fox character, and let's think about what are these consequences of failure, right? So this character, if they do not, their need is accept that it takes time to achieve something of value. Their conscious need is that they need money fast, got a debt. They need to fix problem with their marriage, right? So the stakes, let's start with the conscious needs. The stakes for getting money fast, got a debt, we could increase that stake by, there's threats against this character's life, right? Or to get beat up. Maybe this is a children's story. But so that adds some more stakes if it's just debt, right? But you can add that there's danger, right? So consequence of failure is, the fox will get beat up if he does not get the money, right? Because he has this conscious need of needing money. And if he doesn't do that, he'll get beat up, right? The other consequence of failure, right, of one of his conscious needs is that if he doesn't fix the problem with marriage, his wife is going to leave him, right? So his wife will leave him. And his unconscious need, that has some stakes as well, right? Because his real problem, his deeper problem, isn't just this particular debt that he has, right? Or just these particular issues he's having with his marriage. It's even if he solves those, right? Just this current issue, he gets past them. Because his unconscious need isn't met, he's still going to be experiencing other problems, right? So they may keep gambling, right? May gamble more or get involved in more risky behavior for things that may have a reward, but some form of gambling, maybe you'll get into crypto. But so I'll add this stake as well that, if he doesn't meet this, he's going to continue down a destructive path, right? Where we don't even know it. We may not know exactly where this path will lead them, but we can sense that it's destructive, right? That it's harmful to him and everyone around him. So his stakes could be to, destroy all his relationships, all of his relationships. Yeah, just with everybody. He may just destroy them all because he ain't getting more debt because he's going to keep gambling, for example. So, these can add some extra layers for this character that really makes, you connect and root for them to achieve their needs because you can see what's going to happen. And often with characters, this is actually an area where writers can struggle or not put as much attention here, because this is really important for a reader to connect, to care about the concerns of the character. And so, having stakes that aren't high enough makes it very difficult for the reader to care. The reader could, if the stakes are really low for the fox, then you don't really care if he stops gambling. You're like, maybe you should keep gambling. It's, it's a cool character trait. Now I want to break you out into your groups so that you can talk about the stakes for these characters and really think about, when you're looking at their needs, each of the different needs can have different stakes, right? Or they can combine together. But let's, think through how we can, really catch these stakes and really how can you increase the stakes, right? Let's move on to the challenges. So for the challenges, we have internal and external. The internal challenges are the beliefs and behaviors that this character may have, which is making it difficult for them to achieve their need, right? And so actually you can check even in your own where that there's a difference between the need and the internal challenge, where oftentimes the internal challenge the need could be written as the internal challenge, but we need to figure out how to separate those, and we'll see that together. But it can be a belief, right? And so this belief that this character has can, let's say for the cop, for example, the cop believes that being alone and not depending on someone is what life is about, right? You can achieve your goals better. You have less risk. You will have less heartbreak. And so it's a belief that they have. And so this belief is what's holding them back. If they would only let this belief go, then they would get to their need, right? But this belief is blocking them. And so sometimes you can have a belief being obvious, as I was saying, and obvious like the inverse or the opposite of what their need is. Sometimes the belief can be something that doesn't, at least initially seem like it's directly blocking their need, but it could just be making it more challenging, right? For them to achieve it. Or it can be a behavior. And so a behavior could just be something a character does without thinking, right? It's how they respond to things. For example, someone who lies a lot, anytime they get scared or nervous or uncomfortable, they lie, right? So they do it without even thinking. And if you set them down and say, do you think lying is a good idea? They'll probably say no, right? Well, that could be a lie, but they could believe that lying isn't the best thing to do, but their behavior is that when they panic, they do it anyway. So it's their behavior. It's not really their belief that they believe in lying. They just have that behavior. And then every other challenge is an external challenge. So it can be another character, right? An antagonist who's actually blocking the character's getting in the way of them achieving their goal. Or it can be another character that's like a bad example, right? Someone who that this character respects, and they're just giving them bad advice, right? And so it could really be this external challenge that as long as they sort of have this character in their life, it could be making it difficult for them to achieve their needs. The challenge could be setting, where it's the whole world is against you, right? Or, in the Lord of the Rings example, going from the Shire to Mordor is the setting is in between that, right? All these different mountains they have to cover and creatures they have to dodge and fight, that the setting itself is fighting against them to make it to, at least for that plot related need. But also the setting could be just the world's belief, right? What the world has told you as about yourself, or about what your capabilities are, or about what's important, and that can be holding you back. And then the third, I just separated as information and just some knowledge that the character doesn't have. That if they knew this fact, then they would be able to get past their what's blocking them. And and so especially for like a mystery story or a detective story, or oftentimes in like dystopian stories, there's some secret about the past that once it's revealed, it could at least apply, it could liberate the people. But even there's other ones, especially where it could just be some fact about the past that for them to realize it isn't true, right? It was something in their history books that they think is true that explains why they are oppressed, and they believe it because it's in the history books and they think it's a true fact. Versus until they, so to get past this challenge, they have to discover that fact. But and once they know it, then they are able to get to their need. So these are internal versus external. And so let's go into the tortoise and the hare and capture his internal and external challenges. So his internal challenge is that he believes there's a quick fix to all his problems, right? That's just a deep belief that he has that, that is really at the core of what his challenge is, his internal challenge. And his external challenges are that he does not have the money. He does not have the money to pay back his debtors, right? And I would add on top of that, he doesn't even have the money to gamble. So he got to get the money to gamble from somewhere. So he needs money in order to gamble it. So that's a challenge for him, because he has this conscious need of paying back the debtor. So it's a challenge to him in that scenario. So now we can we'll break out into rooms again, and so you can talk through and apply these to your story. So now we'll move on to the development types. So as I mentioned there before, there's 4 types. And the basis of all the types have to do with the character and their relationship to their internal challenges. So for positive, it's about, does the character reject their internal challenge? So meaning, in the cop drama scenario, the cop internal challenge is that he believes that he doesn't need any partner because having anyone else in your life that you care about is just a liability, right? Makes you more vulnerable, and he doesn't want to be vulnerable. And so for positive arc development is that by the end of the story in the arc, this cop rejects that belief. So he gets further away from that belief. And it's a positive arc because this is a clear sign of growth, right? Positive growth that they reject this belief. And the opposite of that is a negative arc where the character gets closer, deeper into that belief or behavior, right? So it's a challenge, right? So for the cop, if by the end of the arc, they decide not only do they not want a partner in the bureau, right? They want to go live on a desert island because just being around anyone is worse, right? They think it's worse for their life. So it will be a negative because they sank deeper into that belief. And so it will be a negative arc. Just an example that comes to mind is, the story of Two-Face from Batman that, first is a politician and he sinks deeper into thinking sort of poorly of the political spectrum and just the community, and he ends up becoming a villain, right? Because he sinks deeper into a lie that he believes. So it's a negative transformation because he sank deeper into it. Then we have flat and none. So flat means, both of them, flat and none, both mean that there is no change in the character getting closer or further to that belief, right? Positive, negative means positive, they get further from that belief, they reject it. Negative means they get closer, deeper into that belief, they accept it. For flat and none, the character does not change in reference to that belief. Now for flat, it means that the character maintains the same belief, but with flat, how the reader discovers this character's challenges, that can have the sense of an arc, right? Where when you first introduce to the character, a little bit about them, maybe you know the external challenges, or maybe you don't initially. And as this character develops in front of the reader's eyes, as they learn more about them, they can learn more and more about the internal challenges of this character, right? The complexities of it, the levels, the deepness of it. But the character in itself did not change, right? They're the same person from the beginning. So, this is great for villains, for example, where you're really just introducing the villain and, the reader is learning more and more about the villain's motivations and their challenges. And it can be a flat arc because the villain doesn't change, but you learn more about them, your understanding of them. So your experience of the character is like a deeper experience. And then there's none, where there is no evolution in the what you understand about the character. However you're introduced to them, they're pretty much the same. It's you have all the information you need to know about them. There's no deeper levels, no complexity to discover with them. For example, for a character like Sherlock Holmes, most of the stories that he's in, I'm not reading all of them, but its development type is none, right? How Sherlock Holmes is introduced in the first scene is pretty much who they are through the end, right? He's not rejecting or getting closer to their internal challenge, nor are you learning deeper levels of Sherlock Holmes. It's just, he's there, he's doing his thing. And so there's no development type. But even though there's no development type, it doesn't mean he doesn't have that structure of the parts we saw before. So he has his needs, his stakes, his consequences, he has those. But there's no development in terms of them getting closer or further from that internal challenge. So let's jump into the tortoise and the hare. And So I have, I have some beats for the fox on the side here. And let's take a look at these beats and determine whether they have a positive, negative, flat, or none arc. So let me zoom in over here so it's easier to read, and I'll read it aloud. The fox owes a lot of people a lot of money. He has a gambling problem, and his wife is threatening to leave him. That's the first beat. Second beat. The fox thinks the solution to all his problems is winning one last bet. He tells the tortoise that he should challenge the hare to the race. Third beat. Fox bets on the tortoise winning. His partner notices that her pearl necklace is missing, and the fox pretends he doesn't know where it is. Fourth beat. He wins a lot of money, but his wife leaves him anyway for lying and still gambling. He swears to never gamble again. So based on our definitions of development type, would this fox, says development, be positive, negative, flat, or none?
It would be positive because he swears to never gamble again. He stops gambling, and that's what he needed to stop doing.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. He is rejecting the belief that there's a quick fix to his problems, and he's rejecting it by giving up gambling. Now, if we wanted to turn this into a negative development type, which beat or beats would we need to change in order to make that happen?
Probably the part where the wife leaves him, and the part where he swears to never gamble again, and instead he gambles more because he has the money, and the wife decides to be with him or something like that.
But so he already thinks there's a quick fix to his problem. So just continuing to gamble, that's continuing with where he was, right? So that would actually, he wouldn't be particularly closer or further to that internal challenge, with rejecting it. So we would have to make him sink deeper into it, right? So to be doing things that he's never done before, right? To sink deeper into the belief. How could we do that?
Well, maybe he won a lot of money, and now he's got nothing to lose because his wife left him, and now he's going to start organizing more of these races because he sees it's a good business, so he starts organizing more of these races.
So I would add that now we consider that could be him sinking deeper because he wasn't doing that thing before. He was gambling before, but he wasn't becoming, if we extreme it, he becomes this, illegal gambling mogul who is running the whole gambling rings of the animal kingdom, right? And so he really sank deeper into with this behavior of gambling, but also this belief that he could quickly rise to the top and take over the animal gambling ring. But yeah, so that's how it can be negative. I guess we covered a little bit. What would be flat would be that he just continues, he just goes back to gambling. He's like, well, she left. That sucks. Well, I guess I'll go gamble this money on something new, right? And that's just continuing with what, maybe I can buy her back, right? Then he's like, well, maybe I can go gamble and get her a better pearl necklace or something. But it's the same behavior, right? And so they can continue with that, and it's just a flat. They didn't really learn anything, and they're exactly who they are. Now, the more tricky one is for the none. How could we change this so that it's a none, right? Versus a flat. So actually, I would say that this one is as it is. If we wanted to make this a none, firstly, we would have to, yes, have no, that last beat where he decides to never swear. He swears to never gamble again. We have to remove that, right? He just continues gambling, so he has to continue gambling. But for none versus flat, it's about what we learn about the fox, right? So in the way it is, we pretty much get all. Well, we learned that actually his also about lying, right? By the third beat, we didn't know that he lies in order to, that's part of his, thinking it's a quick fix, but the levels of that challenge, right? That he would lie to his wife about taking the necklace. We learned that, by the third beat. So really, we would have to get all this information pretty much in the beginning, at the introduction of the fox, so that there's nothing deeper that we get, right? We can see more examples of him lying, more examples of him gambling, or more examples of him thinking there's a quick fix, but we're not getting any additional nuance, right? So in this one, if we just fix we remove from the fourth beat, that he never swears to gamble again, it would be a flat, because there is we're getting some layers of depth of the fox as we go through. But if we wanted to make it a none, we should try to squeeze everything in the beginning, right? All the components about their challenges in the beginning, and then there'll be no development type. So now, want to switch to we can switch back to breakout rooms, and you can with your own story, really try to capture just a couple main beats for your character to capture their development, right? Is it a positive? Is it a negative? Is it flat? Is it none? With 4 or 5 beats, is enough to capture the general structure of that. With this one, we only have 4 beats, and we can capture, positive, negative, make small changes to switch between the ones. So I'm going to open the rooms back up. And then you can join back to your room and, work on trying to, capture their development. But I think additionally to think about how could you change it to another one. Right. So first capture it, your story, it's a negative arc, first capture that, but then look, how could you change it to flat? How could you change it to none? How could you change it to positive? Now we can take the structural components of this character's arc and actually structure it into a story. Right. So for example, where do the needs of the character come from? From your whole story structure. Is there a particular theme that you want to capture? Right. That is not just this character's, development, but is a part of a larger conversation. So, the cop drama, their need to have community or be connected to people. This could be a bigger concept than just this character, right? And so it's really some theme that's part of your story, and you can connect it to that to keep track of sort of how this characters, even their own arc, their own development, they have these relationships to larger structural parts of your story. And same for the stakes or the challenges. Who is their challenge? Is it another character, right? Or for the development type. How does it relate to the plot, right? Is the plot going to reward the character for having a positive development, right? Which is positive means they reject their lie, the internal challenge, the belief or behavior. Does the plot reward them for it, And so capturing that relationship there so that, because to bring that to fruition in the story, there's many other components that are there. There's other things connected to that plot that you need to keep track of. There's other themes. This theme relates to other characters. So you might want to just really capture how it's related to each individual character so that you can see overall, how does this general theme show up throughout your different characters or the different challenges, or, for one character, one connection is to something that's a challenge, but to someone else that can be part of their need, right? And so you can really just capture these interesting structural components. So for Lynit, or the story of the tortoise and hare, I'm going to capture these different components of the needs, the stakes, the challenges, as part of the structure of this character, the fox. So, his needs, he needs to accept that it takes time to achieve something of value. In this story of the tortoise and the hare, the main theme is slow and steady wins the race. And so it's really his need is that he needs to learn that lesson, similar to the hare, right? Who needs to learn that slow and steady wins the race. So this is really his need, and we can structure him in connection to that, right? So, we can just copy that right in there. But now it's, part of the structural component of this character. The same for their conscious needs. They need money to get out of debt. Well, I already have them connected to the city underbelly, but that's the side of town that he owes them money, right? So it has to do with the setting. Like he grew up on the poor side of town, and so he owes people money there. And so I actually already have it there. And then he needs to fix his problem with his marriage. Well, we can connect that to Miss Fox. He's, what's the issue there? His kind of conscious need is that he needs to gain her trust, right? Or his conscious need he needs to fix the problems of his marriage, but well, actually, no, the relationship is shaky after years of the fox lying to her. So, that's really the relationship between that, but now it's structured and captured and connected to this other character. And then for the stakes, the fox will get beat up, that's captured here. The wife will leave him, that's capturing that relationship. Destroy all his relationships and get into more debt. That's more of a general thing, but I would actually capture that's connected to the slow and steady theme, right? Theme is really trying to say that if you don't, appreciate slow and steady, you're going to have consequences. So it's really captured to that. And same with his challenges. This is a very simple story. So all of his things a lot of things are summed up by those three things: his relationship to his wife, this theme, slow and steady, and to the setting, the city underbelly, which is where he grew up. So but at least we have that structured. But the valuable thing of doing that is that if we go back to the visualization, we can see now that this character, the fox, let's go find him. He's structured to the important elements of the story. And, if we are adding another character to the story, if he isn't connected to the other most important elements in the story, then you're not a major character, right? Structurally. So even if we put the fox in every scene and we have him, the most lines, the most screen time, but something will feel off in terms of the structure of the story if he isn't integrated into, or the rest of the story won't match. If we made the whole story, everything about the fox, but then the story of the tortoise and the hare would seem like a random side anecdote, right? Because the fox isn't really integrated deeply into all the concepts, right? And so by connecting it, it can also help you when you look at your overall structure to identify, did I really put this character, deeply into the story? Are they connected to the most important elements? And then we can see that the fox is. And so for this, this next breakout group, you can try to figure out for your character, what are the other elements of your story that you can pull out these pieces, that you can pull out their stakes, their needs, their challenges, their development type, and now open the breakout rooms back up. for this next part, so we covered previously, the basic components of the structure, right? Of an arc, right? The needs, the stakes, the challenges, and the development type. But as I mentioned earlier, when you're actually outlining, right? Outlining involves these three different phases of your notes, the actual outline of the document, and the written text when you may be discovering part of the story, and that you're often moving between. So even when you're creating a new character, sometimes it can be hard to just structure the outline by itself, right? Just produce the document, because a lot of your real outlining comes with sometimes you writing some scenes, discovering new things, seeing how your character reacts, then figuring out more about how you want to structure them. So we're going to cover some tips that, while you're going through this process, right? So maybe your first version of your character outline, you have very little information in their needs, stakes, challenges. You may know very little. Maybe you only know one. Maybe you only know their need when you first start, or maybe you only know their challenge. But these tips will help you discover those things and really get into the mind of your character so that you can actually structure them, more properly as you know more. But so for the first portion, we're going to cover tricks to get inside your character's head, right? So first is to write all the details about them as I statements. In my personal sort of experience, that I've used to struggle more with switching between multiple characters when I'm writing. Because, in my story, there's often 4 or 5 characters in a scene. And if I'm, reviewing my notes about them and then trying to write them into that scene, and my notes are all in third person, right? So they're a bit impersonal about this character. It's me talking about the character in my voice about them. It's then harder for me to switch into their voice because I have to go from my own voice about them to connect to their voice. But if all of my details and my notes that I write about this character, I write them as I statements, when I'm reviewing or referring to my notes, I'm already in the character's voice. So I'm always in it. So anytime I'm looking at anything about the character, I'm in their voice. And the second is to, interview the character after the end of the book. And, with a character, imagine that they're on some big talk show. Of my days, like Oprah was like the biggest one. And, where the character starts by saying, you wouldn't believe what it was like to. And then they tell you about what the experience was like for them that they went through in the story. So it's, from them in their own words, after the story's over, what was it like? Was it a roller coaster? What surprised them? And here you're really focusing on the emotional component from the character, right? The plot part, that it can be some difficult events that happen to the character and they can capture that. But here you really want to focus on what was the emotional journey like for this character through this story, right? And that can really help you connect with how they are viewing sort of what happened to them. So I'm going to, and the reason I also want to show, I want to jump back to, we've been looking at the outline of the fox from the tortoise and the hare. A quick background for the new person who joined is that I've been using as a backdrop the story of the tortoise and the hare, and we want to add this new character, the fox, who we believe is really the one who instigated the whole altercation between the tortoise and the hare. So we want to make them the new main character, make the story really about them, and their gambling problem because they gambled on the race. But if we look at all the notes we have about the fox, right? We together, we wrote the needs, the stakes, the challenges for this character. We reviewed their beats, but it's all written in third person about the fox, right? And so it can actually trap us in some ways where we are missing from their point of view, what this experience is. right? Like, for example, in terms of the needs of the character, right? We say, we'll focus actually on the challenges. This will be a better example. So, we say he believes that there's a quick fix to all his problems, right? That's what us, the writer, thinks about this character, right? That's his challenge. And that his external challenge is that, he doesn't have money to pay back his debtor and he needs more money to gamble so he can gamble it, right? That's what we are saying. But from the Fox's point of view, if these are written I statements, Fox might phrase this very differently. He may phrase it as, I've just been having bad luck lately, right? With his gambling, right? So, to him, his external challenge, his real challenge is that he's had a bad luck streak, So I've had a bad luck streak. So now we're capturing the structural information, but in the voice of the Fox, which gives us a much richer material for when we actually are writing the Fox. Because now when we want to introduce them, we introduce them with this mindset that I just had a bad luck streak. That's why he doesn't see that he has a gambling problem, right? Because he just believes he has a bad luck streak. But putting it in his terms, gives us, really the types of phrasing we want to use when we write the character, but just gets us closer into their head, how they're viewing this problems, how they're explaining away what happens to them, and then the second, tip, right? Writing this at the end of the book, right? Doing both of these things are ways to help you capture that idea. I came up pretty quickly with this idea that I had a bad luck streak, but you may not, sometimes trying to get into your character's head, you may have to play around with different things. So, starting with that interview question scenario, where, you wouldn't believe what it was like to hearing how they describe it, right? And in that you may find, the voice of the character in terms of, let's take it as a bad luck streak, or just their experience with, realizing that they have a problem with gambling, or why they never recognized it before, and just how they internalize it, interpret it. And so just different, just ways to really try to capture the same thing. But yeah, I find for me that I do a little bit of bouncing between both, because sometimes I especially for a new character, I'm not so much in their head, so I don't know exactly how they would phrase it. It's still really generic phrasing that, I might, my first time through, I might say, like, their challenge, they don't think they have, like, I don't have a gambling problem. Like, I would write in their words where they would say, I don't have a gambling problem. That's technically in their words. But it's still from my framework, because who asked them that, right? Why would the character say, I don't have a gambling problem, unless someone else said that to them? And so if it's just purely from their own point of view, they might not mention it at all, right? And so I find it's just a way to just help you play around, especially when you're forced in the interview to really be describing it from their point of view, because no one's posing them any questions, right? They're just following that sentence, what it was like. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So now I'll give you a moment to send you back to your breakout groups, where you can take your story, your character that you've been structuring as you've been going through the story. For the new person, you can just try to, for a character either that you've worked on before or that you're really familiar with, capture their needs, their stakes, their internal challenges, and then try to phrase them in these I statements, right? How could you put it in their point of view, or play around with writing that interview, right? What was it like for them after the story, them thinking back on it? So I'll reopen the breakout groups. And I'll go back through some of the early slides just to show some of the components of the needs, the stakes, and challenges that may be beneficial to just review those as you rewrite these things in I statements or do the interview, whichever one you prefer. Okay, I'll be closing the breakout rooms, and you can make your way back to the main room. I'll be closing the breakout rooms, and you can make your way back to the main room as you wrap up. So I'm curious for this part, did anyone unlock or discover something interesting about their character when trying to capture this structured information about them in these I statements or during the interview?
Well, not something interesting, but something that is challenging for me is that since I started with a character which story is not finished, I had like trouble realizing that basically I don't know how this story is going to end for this character. So it was hard for me to start with the interview. But anything that besides that, I think it's interesting, and at least it's helping me with organizing the things that I think that I know that I want for my character, so it's useful.
Mhm.
I had the same feeling, but I thought that maybe a good way to approach it would be not ask in the interview how they feel about the overall situation, but maybe ask them about very specific events in the story and see how they feel about them.
Anyone else? Okay, we can move on. In my personal process, I found similar to what I believe Angel said, that it when trying to do this a little early, it forced me to start asking important questions to myself about where am I trying to go with the plot, right? Or what's a major turning point in the plot, right? To really think of those things later, I mean, early, because my first book, I wrote it completely pants. Like I started it when I was a kid also, so I knew nothing about outlining or writing for that matter. So I just started writing. And so I didn't know where things would go. And I was like, it was really fun because there's like a mystery story too. So I was like figuring out what was happening. I was surprising myself at every turn. But then in later years, when I came back and tried to rewrite it, that's when I found that like there's so much that I wrote in there that was not needed in the story because I had no idea where the story was going. So every time I'm writing new chapters, they were all explorations, right? And these explorations weren't leading anywhere. It was really, I was exploring 4 or 5 different things, and then maybe one of them catches my attention and I carry that all the way through. But then all the other stuff I wrote was just things I didn't need, right? And it was, so even though I came back later when I had to edit, it was, knowing to ask those questions, doing that interview to help me identify which were all those other scenes that I wrote that I don't really need, right? That were enjoyable, that are going through, but they don't actually lead towards that, that climax or the end of the book that the character can have a clear opinion about. So I find it really helps you to figure out what are these questions I don't know, and then you can start trying to answer those earlier, right? That you're like, well, I have no idea where this plot is going to go. So I don't know how this character is going to feel about it. Well, so what do I need to figure out, right? It can almost give you a to-do list. You're like, well, for me to write this interview for them, I need to know generally how the plot resolves, right? So, you can start making some decisions or figure out, well, let's say in the cop drama example that I've been giving since the beginning, if, this cop who, the common trope, he doesn't believe he needs a partner, he wants to work alone, but there's this serial killer out there that he needs to catch. And the only way, for him to catch that serial killer is to work with the team, right? He needs people because the serial killer is really smart and he needs a team in order to catch them. And so in writing, I could figure out really early that I need to know, do they catch the serial killer or not? Right. Which I may not know when I first start the story. I might be just writing, I'm just going to figure out what he's going to do. But very early, I'll start to realize, I need to know if he's going to catch him or not. Or it depends on like what type of theme do I want? Like, do I want this police officer to realize that it's important for him to have people in his life or not? Right. Because I could figure that out without knowing the plot. Right. Because this in this interview thing is about the emotional journey. So you don't really have to cover the plot events that led them there. It's just how they feel. It's like, I learned this lesson, or it was scary to be faced with something. Right. And so you can just start to capture these parts and really know for yourself, I need to figure these things out. And so I can know for myself, I need to decide or figure out early, is the cop going to catch the crook or not, right? And figure that out, right? So, I'll spend some time figuring that out. And actually this segues into the next part, actually. So I'll just transition to that. So the 3 key scenes to write as soon as possible, right? The first is the climactic scene of the character's arc, right? So this is the scene that resolves their arc. So where they accept the belief, they reject the belief. If it's a flat arc, then there's just nothing new. The fact where you realize that there is going to be no accepting or rejecting moment, that they're going to remain where they are, but it resolves it by you knowing, they just stay the same, right? Or none, which, as we covered earlier, just to recap, the difference between flat and none is that flat is that the character does not change in reference to their internal challenge, meaning accepting the belief or rejecting it or the behavior. They don't change, they stay the same. But for flat, you can still learn more about the character's challenge throughout the story, so that the reader experiences a sense of an arc, right? But the character doesn't actually change, but they just learn more. They understand why the character's challenge is that way, or why it's so difficult, and as I mentioned before, this is really good for villains, because you're just really introducing them to the story, or antagonists, that you're just learning more about their motivations, their challenges, without them actually having to change, but the reader experiences an arc, but it's a flat arc. And the none is where you pretty much get all the information you're going to know from the beginning, and then there's no development, right? So, so when you're writing these 3 key scenes, you're resolving the character's arc. So these are some things that you have to be figuring out early. Is it positive, negative? What about it? You don't always have to get all the details, but you can, if something you're not sure, it's something to be aware that this is a key moment of the story and there's a reason you don't want to decide yet, right? To keep track of it so you can come back later once you figure it out. But the climactic scene that resolves the character plot and is a beat, resolve the character's arc and is a beat for the plot. So it's not just that the character realized the true meaning of friendship, right, in that scene, but also in that scene, how does that progress the plot, right? So really trying to make sure you can tie your character's development to the plot. Now, if it's the main character, maybe you want this to not just be a beat in the plot, but also the resolution of the plot. That's possible, but it's not required. But at the minimum, it should be a beat for the plot. Otherwise, it's going to seem like the character's development was just random, has nothing to do with anything, right? That if, in the cop drama, the cop is learning to trust people and build friendships. And then it just has nothing to do with the plot. You know, it doesn't help him catch the Krug, or it doesn't hinder it, or it doesn't move him any closer, just independent, right? It would just seem like a random thing, and you would be waiting for something to explain why this matters, right? Or why you're showing me this about the character anyway. So definitely, and generally it's something I said before, even in a previous workshop, is that your main plot should progress in every scene anyway. So not just for this character scene, but your main plot should progress in some form or function in every single scene. Or it's just going to stand out as like a random interlude of, did you need that? Because the truth is, if it's not part of the plot, you could remove it, because the plot progresses the exact same way. If that scene does not progress the plot, you could remove it from the story and the story would still make sense, right? So there's that. And so similar to the part about that interview is that, yeah, writing this climactic scene, which I'm doing right now for my the sequel to my first book, it is a challenge. Like, it's forcing me to ask some strong questions early on, right? The questions that I need to discover, you know, some things I'm like, I don't know exactly how this, you know, and I write complicated plot fantasy stuff. So I'm like, I don't know exactly how this form of magic is going to relate to the personal growth of this other character. I don't know that exactly yet, but it's putting the questions in my mind. And so then now when I'm writing, I can have targeted tasks, like figure this out, you know, versus purely just write more scenes of the story, right? Where I'm just like, just write more scenes. But no, I need to answer this. So maybe I'll go find some scenes that can answer this for me, and I'll try to write those, right? But it's really giving me some direction. But so first, the climactic scene. Second is the inciting incident, right? So this is where you connect the needs of the character to the stakes, to the challenges. This is the scene that captures why this character is even in the story, right? So really trying to capture that early. How will these things relate? How, what's going to set them off on this journey, right? That you are rooting for this character to hopefully they resolve their needs, both unconscious needs and conscious needs, right? So the conscious needs may be the goal, the plot goal that they know that they're working towards. And the unconscious need is some deeper thing that you as a reader recognize that the character needs and the character does not on the surface, but really connecting those things in that inciting incident. And then thirdly is the character introduction. That even in my first book, when I was rewriting it, this was the flow. When I was rewriting it, it's like, oh, I knew the climax inciting incidents and was getting back to the character introduction. I was like, oh, I know where this character is going. So I can really hint at their, you know, at their challenges really early, right? How do I introduce them really softly because I understand them so well because I know how it's going to resolve. So this is often where, you know, if you're not really familiar with the character or what they're going to do, your introduction is going to be very generic, where you just maybe just talk about aspects of their personality, you know, they're funny, they're witty, and you're capturing that because you're not so familiar with them yet. But, you know, as you figure out your character, this introduction is really how you lay the groundwork for all the layers of their needs and their stakes and their challenges. And you can capture it here. And so the two things you try to really capture is like, what is wrong with life for the character, right? What's their general issue, right? It's a way to help you understand their needs, right? Like, what is their life? Great, you know, they have a lot of money, but they're lonely, right? Or do they, a monster's trying to destroy their home, right? So their life is pretty bad. Maybe they were living a great life until the dragon showed up. And so that's what's wrong with their life, that there's a dragon that's, trying to destroy the village. And then additionally, why would the character resist the inciting incident? You know, if you can see that from, the very first, paragraph of when your character is introduced, pays off, right? Where you can really capture why would they resist it, right? What is, and, and it will be related to their needs and their challenge, right? But really their challenge, what is this little belief they believe, right? That's going to make it difficult for them to achieve this need, that you can see that early, capture that thing that's going to make them resist the inciting incident, right? That, in this cop drama, let's say the bureau is, to get this serial killer, he's trying to amass a team, a coordinated team of people working together. And so this cop is going to resist that, right? Because the cop doesn't want these partners. So when we introduce the cop, we would really want to seed why they would resist it, right? So we may need to show, in this example, maybe some backstory about how they lost their previous partner, or or loved one or something, and they carry this fear, this trauma with them, and so we could just introduce the trauma, right? We don't have to put it in context of anything, but it's really the reason why they're going to resist the inciting incident. But it's really, you don't know that at that point. You're just seeing this as part of their personality, and you can see multiple things about a character, and you don't know which one. The reader initially don't know which aspect of the character is going to be the challenge for the inciting incident, but introducing them right early, so that when they get to an inciting incident, you don't really have to explain why they resisted. That's something that I've, in my own work, just in general, that I would catch myself, is that at a big moment, if I have to explain why the character is not doing it, I probably did something wrong that you should already know from previously, right? If there's something big happens to them, I got to explain why they make a decision they make. I may explain it, but I shouldn't be the only, the reader should already kind of know, right? And so it's usually a sign that I didn't structure seeding things about the character early, so that I could pretty much just have them do the thing and you would be on board with it, because you understand, you understood why they were resisted, and you understand what's wrong in their life. So when they get the exciting incident and the character just says no and walk away, you would understand. I don't actually have to explain why they said no, because you would already know, because I seeded it early. You would be connected to them. And that's sometimes how I catch in my own writing, that I'm like, oh, I'm explaining a lot, right, about this character's motivations in the moment when the event happens. And that's usually because I didn't seed these aspects of them earlier, so that this is it's not a surprise, right? Unless you want the character to surprise the reader, like they really go left or where you expect, then of course you would need to explain that more. But you're really checking those moments to see, should I seed this information about the character earlier? And I think because we're actually, I think we're a bit over on time. So where I'm gonna skip us doing this next part, I'll break into a workout group for this section and just move on to the last slide. So the last slide is on conflicts, contradictions, and complexities, right? Which almost all sound like the same thing. But conflicts are, parts of the character that are actually fighting against each other, right? So it can be things that the character can have two conscious needs that are just in conflict. Meaning, so let's say you have a character who, their conscious need is that they just want to become a billionaire, right? They want to work hard and become a billionaire. But they also want to spend time with their family and have a loving family, experience. Those needs, those conscious needs, are in conflict with each other, because the more they're out in the world trying to make their billions of dollars, the less time they're going to have to spend with their family, right? So they're just conflicting, right? That just the more you try to get one, the more difficult it is for you to have the other. And real people have those things, right? Your characters don't have to just be these logical, where their things line up. If they want something, it doesn't conflict with anyone else. The more you can add that, the more it makes them feel real. And then for contradictions, right? Contradictions, now it doesn't require that the things are they're competing against each other in terms of the character achieving them, but it just can be contradicting, meaning that like, let's think of a different example, well, actually I'll say the conflicts, getting one means less of the other, right? That's direct conflict, right? There's only like a zero-sum game. More one means less of the other. The contradiction can just be in terms of like their belief systems, right? Now, they could just believe things that contradict to each other and exist in it, right? So they can be inconsistent in their decision making because they believe two different things that are in contradiction. And just maybe sometimes they make decisions on one versus another, right? So let's say, for example, let's keep with the person who wants to be a billionaire and also sort out their family. So now they can have a contradiction on, being anti-capitalist, right? And believing that with with this money, they can help a lot of people, right? So there can be this contradiction where they're like, no, I do want to get a lot of money so I can help people reach out, but then that means I have to build like a capitalistic organization in order to get it, which is then probably going to disenfranchise more people. So they can just have this contradiction in them, and it's just there, right? So some days they make some business decisions that they're like, you know what, we're going to offer this thing for free. They're like, but you're going to get less money. Like, well, I'm just in the mood for it. They do that. And then the next day they're cutthroat on, paying their employees less money because they're like, we need to make the company make more money. And so they can just have these contradictions where they're just both existing. Sometimes they do one or the other. They're still getting to their $1 billion, right? So there's not conflict. They're not conflicting with each other. They're not stopping this person from making $1 billion. But they're just these contrary beliefs that just contradict each other, and they bounce between the two, but they can still achieve their need. And then the third is complexities, where it's just something just like that makes it really difficult. Parts of the character makes it really difficult for them to achieve their goal, right? So if we had a character who wants to let's say make $1 billion, but they only want to do it with renewable materials in their building or something, in their products, and everything is organic, for example. So that's something they believe in. And so it's a complexity in terms of them achieving something they want, because they want the $1 billion, but they only want it through renewable energy. So it just makes it more complex, right? So it just adds a level that the things aren't contradicting, they're not conflicting with each other, but they have to be a bit more careful, mindful of how they're going to go about achieving their need because of this complexity, right? So the more you can add these into your characters, this is what gives them that realistic feel, where you're like, I know somebody like that, right? Or where you can imagine this person where it's like, they're really, they're focused on this one thing, but they just have this other contradiction that's there. And the character has no problem not resolving it, right? They're just like, so what? I want these two things that contradict each other, and that's who I am, right? And that could really make them feel like real people. So anywhere you can think of these things, right? And sometimes the conflicts, and I remember in my first book, when I wrote it the very first time, so the story is about a group of kids who are like on the run from a military draft. And so when I first wrote it, that's all I knew. Group of kids, they're running from a military draft. And when I first wrote it, I was just like, well, nobody wants to join the military because it's so awful, right? But then at some point I was like, could I add some complexity where this one character wants to join where everybody else doesn't, right? That adds some complexity. So now their desire to join the Guard is more complex because everybody else doesn't want to, right? And them being on a mission with people who don't want to join it and they want to join adds a lot more complexity, right? And so you can really find these things by even looking at your characters within each other. How can you add conflicts in terms of just their general beliefs? How does the belief of one character conflict with another, or contradicts another, or adds complexity to another character? So it can be within characters, but also among characters, these conflicts, contradictions, and complexities, which just adds richness to the whole cast. So we're coming to the end of the workshop. So to leave you with something you can work on your own is to describe your main character. I did have switched around some things of the workshop, and we did some of these throughout. I know there's a way to the end to do it, but to describe your main character in terms of their connections to other story elements, right? So, capture those structural components of the needs, the stakes, the challenges, the development type, right? And especially when you want to think of theme of your story, really thinking about how the development type of your character relates to the plot, relates to the theme, right? Is the character accepting their belief or rejecting it, really commenting on some larger theme of the story? And how does the plot reward them for that, right? In the cop drama, you can have, he can have a positive development where he learns to trust other people, and he catches the serial killer, but then the serial killer kills somebody on his team, right? So he learned the lesson, he had a positive development to reject that being alone is better, but then the plot did not reward him for that, right? The serial killer did kill two of his partners, right? So, so capturing that structural component, because this starts to get you more thinking about the theme, right? What is the theme? Is there a larger idea that you're trying to capture with this character's development type and how it relates? And then the last piece, I really found for just practice, to take a character, a character from work in progress or from story, and summarize their development in 5 beats, right, of how they develop, but then try testing it out, rewriting as positive, negative, and flat, right, to test how you can just manipulate these beats to switch around the development type. And I hope you actually start to see is that it's actually not much of a change to switch between these things, right? Sometimes you can just change one beat if you want these things to change between a development type, right? As we saw with the tortoise and the hare story, or the fox, right? His unconscious need, or really his challenge, was that he has a gambling problem. And so positive would be for him to reject gambling. Negative would be for him to sink deeper into gambling and gamble more, gamble on other things in life. Flat would be for him to just gamble the same amount, kind of just stay the same about where he was. And that for us to change that, all we had to do was change one beat, right? The last beat of the story. And that switched it, when the race was won and his wife left him. However he responded after that is what determined that story to be positive, negative, or flat, right? And so that extrapolates to large stories, because even if something is positive, meaning at the end the character rejects the lie, the belief, their journey to it could be ups and downs, right? So they could be, at first sinking deeper into the lie and really getting grounded into it. But then by the end, they say, you know what, never mind, and reject it. And then it's a positive arc. Even if most of the book they spent negative deep into the lie, getting deeper and deeper and worse into it. If at the end they reject it, then it's positive, right? So to just capture the technical components of positive, negative, flat, you can really just change one thing pretty much. But it's about the experience you want the story to have, right? do you want the character to spend time digging deeper into it? And that relates more to like what you want for the theme, or what's some larger idea you want for the character to really show about their journey of going through their development. But yeah, so this is the end. I want to thank everybody for coming and participating. Do you have any general questions or comments or feedback on the workshop? Well, soon we'll be posting a recording of the workshop or one of the sessions. So if you want to review things, you'll be able to review that. I believe also we'll email the participants with the what's next questions, so that you can work on those. But in the Lynit community, we'll post one of the recorded workshops, and we'll post the questions of like what you can do next after these workshop. And so that's an opportunity to, you can share with the community sort of your how you apply these things to your story and get feedback or ask questions or follow up in the Lynit community. But yeah, so that'll be there. And so you should get a notification from the community when we post, I believe. So but yeah, so thank you very much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.